So anyone who knows me, which I know some of you do, will know that, there's a very, very simple thesis underlying the book, which you can say in 3 propositions. The first is that sex is real. We are mammals. It's binary. It's immutable because we are mammals. And the second is that sometimes matters. It matters when it comes to safety, dignity, privacy, sport, obviously child rearing and childbearing. And the third one is that's especially for women. And why especially for women? Well, women have been oppressed on the basis of our biology. They still are in many parts of the world. Look what's happening in Iran right now. That's not because of anyone's declared gender identity. It's because they're female. And I was interested, as someone who likes logical puzzles, what happens when you replace that with something nebulous? So the first line of the book, which wasn't the first line of the first draft, my editor provided great help with reorganizing the material, is that this is a book about an idea, one that seems simple, but has far-reaching consequences. And about 10 paragraphs down, there's a paragraph that starts, this is not a book about trans people. It's a book about all of us, because all of us have a sex. And that sex can't change, no matter how we feel about it. And quite extraordinarily, it has come to be that sounds like hate. I've spent a lot of time trying to think over the last 4 years how it can be hateful to say to a room of great apes that, you all have a sex, and obviously I can tell it by looking at each of you. And you can tell what sex we are by looking at us, and that was instinctive, and you didn't have to ask, and we didn't need a pronoun badge, and so on and so forth, and depending what your orientation is, which one of us would be in your dating pool, even if you don't personally fancy us, and that's fine. All these things that turned out to be linked to this central idea of what sex people were, and the legs had been kicked out from under that. And I think when you have something that's so central to people as their sex, and you're not meant to mention it, you have to be quite authoritarian, because it does pop up everywhere. Like, it pops up in the census, it pops up in prisons, it pops up in sport. Obviously places like toilets and changing rooms, although I'm really bored of saying that. And if you're not allowed to say it, when it is so obvious and it is so important, you have to be quite vicious in your silencing. Because as soon as you start to say things like, well, if you place prisoners in the prison according to their stated gender identity rather than their sex, you will end up putting a rapist in a women's jail. Like, that's just as night follows day. And so you mustn't get to the point that you're allowed to say, what about the rapists in women's jails? You must stop people from saying anything before they get to that point. And so you get called a bigot and a Nazi and an anti-Semite and a racist and a homophobe and, obviously a transphobe. That was the first one. And people get scared. Like, they get scared and they get ashamed. I've been thinking about shame a lot this week. I mean, I know you probably want to talk about the open letters that have appeared. I mean, what they're meant to do is they're meant to make me feel ashamed. And they're meant to make you feel ashamed for being here, unless you came to wave a trans flag, in which case you can feel very virtuous. But the rest of us are meant to feel so ashamed that we stay away. So I think that shame is a bigger part of the silencing than what people think about originally. I've talked to Kathleen Stock about this and Julie Bindell, and they say, what they're doing is they're making you, A, feel ashamed for yourself, but be very ashamed for what you do to other people around you. Because you start to feel like you're bringing trouble to people. You're bringing trouble to your employer. You're bringing trouble to your family. You're bringing trouble to your friends. Humans are intensely social animals. We were tribal. We still are tribal because we basically are still the people that we were before modern society. But when human beings lived in tribes, to have fallen out with your tribe meant death. Social death was death. So it still feels like death when you're cast out of your tribe. So I think that this strange ideology, and maybe we'll talk about this a bit, has taken hold of quite large groups of people, in particular university students. And now it's social death to say if you dissent from it. So people don't, because social death feels awful.